I'm a 63-year-old man who never once asked the world for anything handed to me on a silver platter. I spent 35 years running a small electrical contracting business out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Started with a secondhand pickup truck, a set of tools I bought on layaway, and a license I studied for by reading textbooks at the kitchen table after my kids went to bed. No investors, no family money, no safety net. Just early mornings and late nights, and the kind of stubborn pride that keeps a man moving when he has every reason to stop. I want to be honest with you right from the start, because what I'm about to tell you is not a story I'm proud of in every detail. There are things I wish I'd done differently. But I also know that what happened to me is something a lot of fathers out there will recognize the moment they hear it, that sick, hollow feeling when you realize the child you gave everything to has started looking at you like you're just a resource, not a person, not a father, a resource. My wife Carol died 11 years ago, pancreatic cancer. She was 51 years old, and she was gone in 4 months from the day they told us. 4 months. I won't go into the details of what those 4 months looked like, because anyone who has watched someone they love disappear that fast already knows what those months feel like. And anyone who hasn't, I hope they never do. What I will tell you is that when Carol died, it was just me and my two kids. My son Marcus, who was 27 at the time, and my daughter Renee, who was 24. Marcus handled it the way his mother would have wanted him to, quietly, with grace, and by throwing himself into work. Renee fell apart for a while, and I let her, because I understood it. She and her mother were close in a way that I always admired but could never fully enter. They had something private between them, something that belonged only to them, and when Carol left, Renee lost the other half of herself. I held her together the best I could. I called every single day for the first year. I drove down to Tulsa from wherever a job had taken me just to take her to dinner, to make sure she was eating, to sit on her couch and watch whatever she wanted to watch on television without saying a single word about work or money or the future. I just showed up, because that's what a father does. That's what Carol would have wanted me to do. About 2 years after her mother passed, Renee met a man named Trevor. Trevor was 34 years old, good looking in that practiced, deliberate way that always made me slightly uneasy, the kind of man who seems to have rehearsed his own charm. He sold commercial real estate in Dallas. He drove a car that cost more than some people's houses, wore a watch I recognized from an advertisement I once saw in an airport magazine, and had a way of talking about himself that always managed to circle back to how much potential he had, how much he was about to do, how big things were about to get for him. He had a polish that didn't quite match the substance underneath it, if you know what I mean. I've worked around people all my life. I can usually tell who's building something real and who's just describing the building they wish they were in. But Renee loved him, or she thought she did, and I told myself what every father in my position tells himself, that my instincts were clouded by grief, by protectiveness, by the simple fact that no man on earth was ever going to feel like the right man for my daughter. I talked myself out of every concern I had. I sat across from Trevor at dinner, and I smiled, and I asked him about his work, and I told myself I was being fair. They dated for about 8 months before Trevor started talking about buying a house together in the Dallas suburbs. A nice house, a $480,000 house, to be exact. And that's when the conversations started coming to me. Trevor's family, from what Renee told me, was comfortable. His father had done well in the oil and gas business years back. They had money. But when it came time to talk about a down payment, and about the fact that Trevor's credit had some complications from a previous business venture that hadn't gone the way he'd hoped, it was Renee who called me. It was Renee who explained, in that careful voice she used when she wanted something she wasn't sure I'd give her, that they needed a co-signer, and not just for the mortgage. Trevor was also looking at launching a property management company. A smart idea, she said, a real opportunity, and the business loan he was applying for required collateral and a co-signer as well. I asked one question. I asked why Trevor's family wasn't helping with this. Renee told me his parents preferred not to mix family and money. I sat with that for a long moment. I thought about the fact that I was being asked to mix family and money, which apparently was fine when it was my family and my money, but I didn't say that. I told Renee I would think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I talked to Marcus, who told me quietly but clearly that he had a bad feeling about Trevor. I talked to my accountant, who walked me through the numbers and said it was manageable but not without risk. I prayed about it, if I'm being honest with you, in the way that a man prays when he's not sure he believes in much beyond hard work, but he needs to hear something outside his own head. And in the end, I said yes, because Renee was my daughter. Because I had promised Carol I would take care of her. Because the look on Renee's face when I said yes was the first time I had seen her look genuinely happy since the day her mother was diagnosed. I co-signed the mortgage. I co-signed the business loan. And because Renee mentioned almost in passing that the venue they wanted for their wedding the following spring required a deposit that Trevor was short on, I wrote a check for $18,000 to cover the venue, the caterer, and the floral arrangements. Because that's what fathers do. That's what I told myself. That's what I kept telling myself. The wedding was scheduled for the second Saturday in April. I had already bought my suit. I had already written the toast. I worked on it for 3 weeks, rewrote it 4 times, read it out loud to Marcus twice, just to make sure I had the emotion right without making a fool of myself at the microphone. I was going to talk about Carol. I was going to tell Renee that her mother would have been so proud of the woman she had become. I had the whole thing folded up in the inside pocket of that suit jacket. 11 days before the wedding, I got a text message from my daughter. I want to read this to you exactly as she wrote it, because I have read it so many times now that I could recite it in my sleep. She wrote, "Dad, I need you to know that Trevor is not comfortable with you being at the ceremony. He feels like you've never respected him and that your attitude has been negative from the beginning. I've thought about it a lot and I think it's better if you don't come. I hope you understand. We'll celebrate with you another time." I read that message 3 times, standing in my kitchen. I want to tell you that I lost my temper. I want to tell you that I called her back immediately, that I raised my voice, that I said everything I was thinking. That would be a more satisfying story in some ways, wouldn't it? A man who fights back, who defends himself out loud. But I didn't do any of that. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I poured myself a cup of coffee. I sat down at the table where Carol and I used to have breakfast every morning before the kids woke up, at the same table where I had read those electrician's textbooks 35 years ago, and I thought about what I was going to do very carefully and very quietly. Then I picked up the phone and made some calls. Not to Renee, not to Trevor. The first call was to my attorney. The second was to the bank where the business loan was held, where my name was attached as co-signer, and where, as co-signer, I had the right to initiate a review of the loan agreement under the circumstances that had changed materially since the signing. The third call was to the mortgage company. The fourth call was to the wedding venue. I didn't raise my voice in any of these conversations. I was polite. I was clear. I explained what I needed, and I asked what the process was, and I took notes. By 9 o'clock that evening, I had set things in motion that could not easily be undone. I did not text Renee back that night. I went to bed at my usual time. I slept better than I had in weeks, which probably tells you something about how much that uneasy feeling about Trevor had been weighing on me, without me fully acknowledging it. At 5:47 in the morning, my phone started ringing. It was Renee. I didn't answer. It rang again, and again. I got up, made coffee, let the dog out into the backyard, and watched the call log fill up. By 7 in the morning, between Renee's number and a number I didn't recognize that I later confirmed was Trevor's, I had 74 missed calls. The text messages started around 6. They started as questions. "Dad, did something happen with the venue? They're saying the deposit was reversed." Then they became more urgent. "Dad, the loan company called Trevor. What did you do? Please call me." Then the mortgage company apparently called as well, because by 7:30, the messages had shifted into something closer to panic. "Dad, please." The mortgage company said the cosigner situation is under review. We could lose the house. Please answer me. By the time I finally responded, at 8:30, I had 91 missed calls between the two of them. I sent Renee one text. It said, "I've been thinking about the situation you described yesterday. You're right, that if Trevor isn't comfortable with me, it doesn't make sense for me to be financially tied to your life together. I've started the process of removing myself from those commitments. I hope you both find your footing. Take care of yourself." 91 calls became 123 by noon. I drove to Marcus's house that afternoon. We sat on his back porch, and I told him everything. He didn't say "I told you so" because Marcus is not that kind of man. He's too much like his mother for that. He just listened. Then he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Dad, you did what you had to do." And somehow that was the only thing I needed to hear. Now, I want to stop here and tell you something honestly, because I think it matters. What I did was not easy. I want you to understand that. Every single hour of that day, part of me wanted to call her back. Part of me wanted to fix it the way I'd always fixed things, by absorbing the pain, by writing a check, by telling myself it wasn't that bad, that Trevor would come around. That love was worth swallowing your pride for. The father part of me, the part that drove to Tulsa just to sit on her couch in silence after Carol died, that part of me was in agony. Do not let anyone tell you that setting a boundary like this doesn't cost you something. It costs you everything in the moment. You just have to decide what you're paying for. 4 days later, Renee showed up at my house alone. She didn't call ahead. She just knocked on my door at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and when I opened it, she looked like she hadn't slept in days, which I suspected was true. She asked if she could come in. I said yes. We sat at the kitchen table. She didn't speak for a long time. I let the silence do what it needed to do, because Carol always said I talked too much when I was nervous, and that the most powerful thing a person can do in a hard conversation is simply wait. Finally, Renee said, I don't know how to explain what I was thinking. I told her she didn't have to explain it. I told her I understood that she was in love with a man who had been working on her for months, probably in ways she hadn't even noticed, chipping away at her trust in the people who had always loved her in order to make himself the center of her world. I told her I wasn't angry at her. I told her I was heartbroken. She cried for a long time. I let her. Then I told her the truth as plainly as I knew how. I told her that I had been willing to give Trevor every benefit of the doubt because I loved her. I told her that I had co-signed for a house and a business and paid for a wedding not because I was trying to control anything, but because she needed those things and I was able to provide them, and that's what parents do when they have the means and the love. I told her that the one thing I had never asked for in return, the one thing that was not negotiable, was to be treated as her father, not as a bank, not as a co-signer, as her father. I told her that when I received that text, the thing that hurt me more than any of the logistics, more than the money, more than the wedding I wouldn't attend, more than the toast I had spent 3 weeks writing, was the realization that somewhere along the way, a man I had tried to welcome into this family had convinced my daughter that I was the problem. That the man who built something from nothing and gave her everything she asked for was somehow the obstacle in her life. I told her that if that's what Trevor believed, then Trevor was wrong. And if she believed it too, then we had a bigger problem than a wedding. Renee didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said very quietly, I know. I knew it when I sent the text. I sent it anyway because he asked me to, and I didn't want to fight with him. I want you to hold on to that sentence, because I think it explains so much about how these situations happen. It wasn't cruelty on her part. It wasn't indifference. It was exhaustion. It was a woman who loved a man who had made her feel like she had to choose over and over again. And she had been choosing him because choosing me felt safer, because she knew I would still be there regardless. She was right about that. I was still there. But I needed her to understand that still being there had conditions now. Not financial conditions, human ones. I told her that I would consider staying on the mortgage under one condition. That condition was not about Trevor apologizing to me, though I thought that would be a decent thing for a man to do. The condition was simply this, that I would never again be the last to know something that directly involved my name. That I would be treated as a member of this family, not a financial instrument to be deployed and then hidden from the guest list. Renee agreed. She said it without hesitation, and I believed her. They did get married eventually. Smaller ceremony a few weeks later. I was there. I wore the same suit. I gave the toast I had written, and I talked about Carol, and I got through most of it without embarrassing myself, which felt like a victory. Trevor shook my hand and looked me in the eye, and I won't tell you it was a warm moment because it wasn't, but it was honest. And I have found at 63 years old that honest and uncomfortable is worth a great deal more than warm and false. Marcus was there. He sat next to me the whole evening, and at one point leaned over and said, Mom would have laughed at all of this. He was right. Carol would have found the whole thing absurd in that way she had of making impossible things feel manageable with just a few words. The business loan is still active. Trevor's property management company has had some modest early success, which I acknowledge because it's the truth and I'm trying to be fair. I remain on the mortgage for now, and Renee calls me every Sunday. Not because I demanded it, because she wants to. A few months ago, she called me on a Sunday and she said, Dad, I want you to know that I understand what you did and why you did it, and I'm grateful. She didn't say it in a big emotional speech. She said it the way people say things when they actually mean them briefly, plainly, almost as an afterthought in the middle of telling me something else. I told her I loved her. I told her that was all I'd ever needed to hear. Here's what I want you to take away from this story. If you're a parent listening to me right now, the most dangerous thing you can do for a child you love is make yourself so indispensable financially that they stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a structure, like the foundation of a house they walk across every day without once thinking about what holds it up. Gratitude is not automatically inherited, it has to be taught. And sometimes the only way to teach it is to let someone feel, even briefly, what the world looks like without the thing they've been taking for granted. I'm not telling you to freeze your children out. I'm not telling you to hold your money over their heads as a weapon. What I am telling you is that love without self-respect is not actually love, it's just an arrangement. And arrangements don't survive real storms. What I had with Renee for those terrible, quiet 4 days before she knocked on my door was real. It was hard, and it was painful, and it was honest. And it built something between us that is sturdier now than it was before any of this happened. Carol would have handled all of this with more grace than I did. But I did the best I could with what I had, which is the only thing any of us can promise. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt like the wallet in the room rather than the person, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you've got someone in your life right now that you've been giving everything to without getting basic respect in return, I hope this gives you something to think about. You matter. Not your money. Not your co-signature. You. Take care of yourselves out there. And hug the people who've never once made you feel like a transaction.